Welcome to my exhibition, American Parades at Spazio Labo. This is a long tradition we have here. This is the third time I'm showing, first time in this gallery. So hopefully I'll manage to get to see it at some point, I don't know. I'm here in a remote part of Bulgaria and I'm hopefully heading to Bologna from here, but we'll see. American Parades, I suppose the genesis of the project really started when I was traveling with Vanessa Winship, my wife, when she was making the dances on Jackson. That's over 2011 and 12. And I was generally just assistant because at that time I didn't have a deadline. But for me, you know, it sounds very generous, me saying that I was assistant, but all the time I'm looking and trying to understand what I'm seeing. And for me, that time was invaluable because I think if I started to work straight away, I probably would have made a slightly angry project. And I don't know if that's the best way to comment about a country in that place. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the politics of the road and how the road in the US has created this segregation and separation of populations. Often you would be in a neighborhood and you'd see these motorways, these highways intersecting the area. And what once used to be a vibrant neighborhood, because of the way the roads came in the 60s, the neighborhood started to become cut off and ghettoized. And then there was no reason for anyone to go into that neighborhood. So I mean, that was one of the things I spent a lot of time thinking about. The other thing I was kind of thinking about, compared to Europe and most places in the world, in fact, you have a vibrant street life, walking. In the States, everything is pretty much done by car, and neighborhoods are actually, the country is zoned into residential, commercial, and industrial. So these three elements are separated, which we don't have so much in Europe. So I was trying to, it was going to be a very complicated project, and I started to look at Martin Luther King boulevards in particular while I was with Vanessa. And often these streets would be completely empty. Then one day, there was a parade on one of the Martin Luther King boulevards in Lafayette that Vanessa wanted to photograph some of the people on the floats. And suddenly the street came alive with people. So I actually made my first image that's kind of very similar to the images in American Parades from that parade. But I didn't really think anything of it. And then another image that comes to mind is where we were following the story of Trayvon Martin, who was a young African-American man who was visiting his father, and a kind of self-proclaimed vigilante watchman approached him, and there was a struggle, and the vigilante killed the young black guy. And this was all great. This story was breaking when we were in the US, and eventually in the court case he was found not guilty because they said it was self-defense, which was kind of like a ludicrous. You approach someone and you kill them in self-defense. So in a sense, I think that maybe that was also the beginnings of Black Lives Matter in the States with this case. Anyway, there was a parade and a march combined in Trayvon Martin's neighborhood in Miami. And again, I think they were celebrating Martin Luther King's day that he died. And so they had a demonstration for Trayvon Martin at the same time. So we traveled to this parade demonstration, and I made very similar shots again to American parades during that time. But I suppose I left them to the kind of back burner because when I went to the US in 2016 to start this work, I still had this idea of trying to work out how to make a project around the politics of the road and the society that's created. And we flew into LA, and within, I think, 3 days of arriving, there was a Martin Luther King parade in Long Beach in California. And the following day, there was going to be another one in LA. So they didn't want to, Long Beach didn't want to clash with the one in LA. And again, it had been a street that I'd been on, Martin Luther King I'd been on, where again, there wasn't very many people. The neighborhood had a bad reputation. And I arrived just as the parade had started. I got out of the car and I instantly started to shoot the frames that you see in the book. It's somehow, or, maybe the previous images subconsciously were on my mind. And so from the very first image, I had that very kind of formal frontal frame. And always I knew that the landscape behind was really crucial for the image, especially as I was kind of thinking, would you know where these Americans lived in the US? Would an African American living in LA look different to one living in the South, say? Would there be telltale signs with clothes? Obviously, the landscape, the architecture particularly. So I did two parades. Those two parades in this very formal frontal structure from the very beginning. Then I was kind of thinking, well, I knew Mardi Gras was coming up in about a month's time, and I was still going to be in the US, so I knew I had these parades to look forward to. But I was thinking, what can I do in the meantime to kind of continue this kind of idea of looking at communities? Because I knew that it would be the parade really shows you the local community first and foremost. And through that local community, you can actually see how segregated the US is and how separate it is from each other, be it racially or economically. And so the Martin Luther King in LA was almost exclusively a black crowd. The one in Long Beach was surprising, and I think that's kind of when I kind of realized that there might be more to it. The one in Long Beach was an African American neighborhood, but because of it being a poorer neighborhood economically, cheaper rents, there was a large influx of Latin Americans, Hispanics, and Asians. So you had the kind of new immigrants moving into that neighborhood. So there was an interesting mix on the in the Long Beach parade. And then I tried a couple of other things while I was in California. One was I went to Chinatown in San Francisco, and again in January there's not really that many tourists around, so it's mostly Chinese people coming in to do their shopping. So I would stand on street corners and wait on the other side while people were queuing up, waiting to cross the road. So I kind of made a number of images like this, and I also went to Berkeley University, again another crossroads where students were waiting to cross, so they were all still very much in the same way that the people were waiting at parades or watching at parades. And then I noticed the demographic of Berkeley university was very much white and Asian, and so there was really unrepresentative of this Hispanic and black populations of California. So I kind of knew it was a very interesting way to do it, and I went to the Mardi Gras, and then I proposed the idea to the New York Times Magazine. They saw what I'd shot, and they basically agreed to fund me going forward. So I was able to come backwards and forwards over the year. In fact, part of it was funded by the workshops in New York that we did together, because I think the day before the workshop, there was the Mermaid Parade in Coney Island, and the day after the workshop had finished, there was Pride in New York as well. So actually that workshop led to me photographing two parades in New York, which was fantastic. And then I would choose which, I wanted to do a very kind of a cross-section of demographics in the US. So even though I was in New York during that time, and July the 4th was coming up, I knew I didn't want to do July the 4th in New York. So I started to research parades, and I ended up going to a place called Ripley in West Virginia. So I had this huge long drive to get there. But it prided itself on being the biggest small town parade in the world, where always the world is in something in America of these claims. So it was kind of a small parade, and it was, and I really wanted to have this demographic of like a white working class population, which this parade really represented. So you know, and you take a chance because you know, I drove, I don't know, 2-3 days. I can't remember how long it took me to get there, and I think the day before there were flash floods across the whole of this region of the Appalachians, and a lot of parades were getting cancelled. Luckily, the Ripley parade went ahead, and I was lucky. It was raining maybe an hour before the parade started and stopped raining for the whole time of the parade, and then rained maybe an hour after it finished.